The moment Sean, my ex-husband, laid eyes on me and our daughter, he hurled insults our way. "Hey, ugly, is that your kid? A defective product just like her mom." These were the hurtful words that greeted me upon our reunion after 13 years. My daughter, seated in a wheelchair, and I were the targets of his scrutiny. I was about to respond with equally harsh language when my current husband, Ken, intervened. "What's wrong with my daughter?" Ken's deep baritone voice echoed, capturing the attention of those around us. Not only did I notice the chilling undertone in his voice, but others also turned to witness the confrontation. Sean's face paled in response. "Allow me to introduce myself. I am R.A., a 35-year-old stay-at-home mom. I live with my 3-year-old daughter, Natalie, and my husband, Ken, who is 3 years my junior. We reside in a house originally built by Ken's parents, who passed it on to us after they moved in with Ken's elderly father. This decision, perhaps influenced by concern for Ken's financial situation, was a significant gesture of kindness. Grateful for my in-laws' generosity, I used to visit them regularly, even after Natalie was born. I helped with hospital visits and household chores, providing support to my father-in-law. The in-laws expressed their gratitude, acknowledging the help during such a busy time with the baby. Ken's family, including his parents and twin sister Sally, became a vital support system. Ken, my second husband, was marrying for the first time, while I had experienced a failed marriage with Sean before. I met Sean during my time in New York for university. We started as friends, sharing information about nearby facilities. However, our paths diverged as he attended a prestigious private university, contrasting with my more practical one. Despite the differences, Sean began spending more time at my place, blurring the lines between friendship and something more. Before long, our relationship with Sean led to us living together like a couple. At that time, I couldn't believe I was dating someone as handsome as Sean. While I may not have possessed the glamour of the female students on C's campus, I believed I could offer a comforting presence. Unfortunately, my willingness to contribute extended far beyond emotional support. I found myself shouldering all the household responsibilities: cooking, cleaning, and laundry, a realization that, in hindsight, seemed absurd. It became evident that Sean sought comfort from the very beginning, a sign that raised red flags. The comfort he desired was purely self-serving, an abbreviation concealing the egoism that made it convenient for him. Love, however, tends to be blind, and I chose to overlook Sean's selfishness. When Sean expressed his desire to quit his job due to its challenges and financial constraints, I suggested moving to a slightly larger apartment. I even offered to cover the rent to ease his burden. We relocated to a new apartment near our initial meeting place, but the burden on me grew significantly. Sean insisted on having 2 phone lines, one for him and one for me, fabricating a story about his parents being conservative and unaware of our living situation. Fearful of their potential withdrawal of financial support, I agreed to his request without fully considering the consequences. The financial strain intensified as the apartment lease and utilities were in my name, and I became responsible for expenses like electricity, gas, water, landline phone bills, and internet charges. Initially, Sean had promised to contribute more towards utilities, acknowledging that I covered the rent. However, it didn't take long before he started apologizing for being short on cash, attributing it to social obligations related to job hunting. Despite his promises, I ended up shouldering all the financial burdens, a situation that would persist. Before I knew it, my financial responsibilities extended beyond rent and utilities. I found myself footing the bill for groceries and even the beer Sean drank after his baths. Sean's contributions were minimal, limited to the occasional delivery pizza when his friends gathered at our place. To make matters worse, he insisted on keeping our living arrangement a secret from his seminar and club friends, fearing awkward teasing. Outside of university classes, my time was consumed by part-time jobs and household chores. This left me with no one to confide in or seek refuge with, forcing me to spend nights at manga caves or diners. Summers were particularly tough, waiting on a park swing in the cold, early mornings until I could return home with insufficient funds for warmth. It led me to question what I was doing with my life. As Sean and I reached our senior year and began earnestly job hunting, I finally reached a breaking point. I accused him of living like a leech and demanded he start contributing to living expenses immediately. Sean, in a soothing tone, apologized and acknowledged taking my kindness for granted. However, his attempt to appease me only highlighted the imbalance in our relationship. The following day, Sean did something unusual. He picked me up from my part-time job, and upon returning to the apartment, I found it cleaned up and a dinner prepared. A thoughtful gesture that seemed to have come from a department store basement food hall. He presented me with a ring from a popular casual brand, expressing his financial constraints but promising to buy me a diamond worth 3 months of his salary someday. It was the first time I felt truly touched by Sean's thoughtfulness during our long relationship. Yet, the seemingly happy memory was short-lived. Soon after, Sean confessed he was torn between getting a job and studying abroad. He expressed concern that if things stayed as they were, he would end up relying on me again, marking a critical juncture in his life. Deciding to venture out on my own for a while, Sean moved out to share an apartment with friends. Left suddenly on my own, anxiety gripped me. However, Sean had left some of his belongings with me and continued to contact me twice a day through email or phone, providing a semblance of connection. I realized I shouldn't mope around and needed to focus on my job search. Despite the challenges, I managed to secure an offer from my first-choice company and mid-sized trading firm. Yet around that time, strange calls started coming to the landline registered in Sean's name. Ominous messages like, "We'll be in trouble if you don't repay us by this week," and "Don't take us lightly," played on the answering machine. Concerned, I reached out to Sean, but he dismissed it, assuring me not to worry. Soon, letters arrived in the mail with phrases like payment reminder and final notice. When I confronted Sean more forcefully, he snapped, stating, "Stop nagging. I've been putting up with someone as ugly and defective as you this whole time, so the least you can do is pay this off as a thank you." His harsh words marked the end of our communication. Deceived by his initial regular contact, I realized too late that I hadn't obtained Sean's new address. Attempts to contact his university proved futile, and they refused to disclose any information. Desperate for any clue, I'd opened some of the cardboard boxes he had left in the apartment. Inside, I found documents from various finance companies indicating debts, old clothes with no resale value, and a used, outdated laptop. There was nothing that could lead me to Sean's parents' address or his current whereabouts, making me realize I was nothing more than a source of money to him. The situation worsened when 2 men in suits arrived at my apartment not long after losing contact with Sean. They informed me that, as Sean's wife and guarantor for his debts, I was expected to repay them promptly. This additional blow, coming at a time when I hadn't even recovered from the shock of being abandoned by Sean, was devastating. It was Ken and his family who eventually rescued me from this situation. Grateful for their support, I've always wanted to do everything I can for my parents and kin. As I pushed my daughter Natalie's wheelchair through the mall, I unexpectedly encountered Sean, the man who had betrayed and abandoned me 13 years ago. He looked at me and Natalie with rudeness, approaching us with an unpleasant smile. The first words out of his mouth were insults directed at both me and my innocent daughter, calling her a defective product, like her mom. I was on the verge of losing my temper when a man stepped in between Sean and me, my husband Ken. Ken, upon witnessing the situation, inquired about what was wrong with our daughter. His voice resonated, attracting the attention of onlookers who stopped to see what was happening. For some reason, Sean, faced with Ken's calm demeanor, turned pale and refrained from retorting. As Natalie and I looked back and forth between Sean and Ken, the confrontation escalated. Sean, unable to withstand the surrounding gazes, snapped at Ken, asserting that it was a private matter and none of his business. However, Ken remained unfazed and replied, I'm involved because it concerns my family. Otherwise, I wouldn't bother speaking to someone like you." Turning to Natalie, he gently said, "Mommy and Daddy have some business to take care of. Auntie will be here soon to pick you up, so why don't you go to her house first?" Hearing this, I couldn't help but exclaim, and although surprised, Natalie, unusually composed for her age, agreed. Soon after, Ken's sister Sally arrived with her children, and Natalie left the scene with them. Ken, losing the initial momentum but maintaining a stern posture, stooped slightly towards Sean, who seemed somewhat diminished by the confrontation. Ken pressed with a half smile. "Let's have an adult conversation, shall we? It's best we move somewhere else rather than providing a free show for the public." Sean, not particularly short, but significantly overshadowed by Ken's near 6'3" stature, and faced with Ken's unsmiling gaze, probably thought it was better than being gawked at by onlookers. Surprisingly, he'd agreed to Ken's suggestion to change locations. The three of them took a taxi and arrived at the building housing Ken's office. With the push of an elevator button and a glance at the tenant directory, Sean realized they were headed to a law firm, causing his complexion to turn pale once again. However, it was too late for Sean to run away, so he reluctantly joined them in the elevator on his supposed day off. Ken appeared with a stern face, bringing his wife, me, and a guest, which surprised the office staff. By the time we were escorted to the back reception room, the staff had regained their composure. Watching Ken's profile, I managed to calm my nerves, but Sean remained visibly restless and uneasy. Observing Sean's state, Ken, with a sly smile, placed a stack of documents on the table, asking a staff member to bring them. He casually mentioned, "It's terrifying how coincidences work, isn't it? To think we'd meet the very person involved before showing this investigation report to the chairman." Sean's complexion grew worse upon hearing this, but I had no idea what they were talking about. Noticing my confusion, Ken began to explain to both Sean and me. The chairman he mentioned was a major client of Ken's office, the current chairman of a machine tool manufacturing company. Recently, the chairman had personally summoned Ken to the company's headquarters, where he was introduced to the chairman's youngest daughter, who had just returned from studying in the United States. The chairman had a special request. He wanted an investigation into a man's background to be kept confidential. And there, in the sales department, was none other than Sean Smith, albeit using a different spelling for Sean back then. Ken continued with a grin, making Sean's face grow even paler. He explained that the chairman's granddaughter, while studying in France, had formed a relationship with a man at the same graduate school. They promised each other a future together. This man had dropped out of a university just before graduating, moved to France, enrolled at a local university, and after graduating, worked for the company's local branch. However, he left to seek further education in graduate school. The granddaughter, a smart woman, had fallen deeply in love with this man, who supported her through homesickness. After enrolling in a French university and completing her master's degree earlier than him, she returned to Japan with him. She then asked her grandfather, the chairman, to approve their marriage and to consider him for a position in the family-owned company. The chairman was completely unaware of this man's existence around his granddaughter in France. However, the executive director, the chairman's daughter, had met the man several times during business trips to France and had been introduced to his parents stationed there. The executive director thought it too sudden for her adult daughter to marry and immediately join the family business as a future executive. After a private discussion between the doting grandfather and the executive director, they discreetly commissioned Ken's law firm, which had a long-standing relationship with their family, to investigate Sean. Feeling a bad premonition, I asked, "Don't tell me that man isn't Sean, is it?" Before Ken could answer, Sean snapped back, "What? It's a problem if it's me. We've been over for ages, and who I marry has nothing to do with you." Sean was a part of my past that I'd rather forget, and I had no interest in his current affairs. However, there was plenty I wanted to say to him out of spite. "Separated, yes, but right before that, you filed for our marriage without my consent, made me a guarantor for your debts, then disappeared, I shouted. Sean seemed taken aback for a moment but quickly smirked. You say that, but you wanted to marry me back then. I just made your dream come true, and in return you helped a bit with my debts. Pointing at Ken, he continued, I was worried when I had to update my passport at the embassy. But when I checked back here, I was relieved to find I was single. I never thought someone as ugly and defective as you would have someone else willing to take you in. So, I was worried you might be waiting for my return. Just as I was about to lose my temper again, Ken stepped in. I thought you had been quiet because you were reflecting, but a scumbag will always be a scumbag, he remarked. Ken then smoothly explained how our marriage was old, leaving Sean officially single. It turned out that when Sean disappeared and debt collectors came for me, Ken's father, my father-in-law, was the first to offer me advice. One of my part-time jobs was tutoring, and at that time, my student was Ken's twin sister, Sally, who had now become my sister-in-law. Sally was a bright kid, but had started to skip school due to being ostracized by her classmates. Hired by her concerned parents, I learned that Sally was excluded for standing up for a friend who was also being ostracized. Trying to cheer her up, I not only helped with her studies, but also listened to her problems. This endeared me to her parents and grandparents, who began treating me like family. Sally happened to be visiting with her mother to share the news of her recommended admission to the college she wished for right when the debt collectors showed up at my apartment. Shocked by my exhausted state and furious to learn about the marriage registration done without my consent and being made a guarantor for debts, Sally immediately contacted her father and grandfather. They brought me to this law firm. From there, my father and grandfather mobilized all their resources to resolve the situation. They started by filing for an annulment due to the unauthorized marriage registration and negotiating with the financial institutions about the invalidity of making me a guarantor against my will. It was a tough battle, but given their expertise in this field, they managed to successfully resolve both issues. I was told that facing a lawsuit for annulment and dealing with stubborn financial institutions was a tremendous effort, especially as Sean was nowhere to be found. Meanwhile, overwhelmed by this sudden misfortune, the shock of being abandoned by Sean, and the turmoil jeopardizing my college graduation and employment offer, I worried about how I could ever afford the attorney's fees. That's when my grandfather-in-law offered me a job at this firm where I worked diligently. I was hoping to repay them in some small way. Despite my efforts to pay the attorney's fees, the Bar Association's regulations only allowed me to cover the actual expenses with a little extra. Thanks to their efforts, the marriage was ultimately annulled, and I was also released from being Sean's guarantor for his debts. So technically, you're not Ra's ex-husband. You're just a blemish on her life, they told Sean. Still, Sean seemed unable to grasp the gravity of the situation, retorting, having a marriage history with such a woman would be boring anyway. As for the debts, they're probably statute barred by now. At that moment, Ken burst into laughter. Facing Sean's confused reaction, Ken retorted, the statute of limitations hasn't kicked in. I believe you'll be seeing some collection efforts starting this coming week. Sean might have thought that after 13 years, his debts were time-barred. But thanks to my grandfather-in-law, I was removed as a guarantor. The financial institution, unable to track down Sean, devised a plan and transferred his debt to a debt collection agency they had ties with. In cases, like Sean's, where repayment was dodged or delayed, making the bad debt unrecoverable, financial institutions often sell these debts to debt collection agencies. These agencies are professionals in collections, employing all legal means possible. Thanks to their extensive knowledge of the law, the agency that purchased Sean's debt was no exception. After proceeding with various legal steps, a court judgment initiated by the collection company has reset the statute of limitations for another 10 years, making the debt fully valid today. Moreover, the total debt, now inflated with accrued late fees and legal costs, has skyrocketed to several times the original amount. Hearing this, Sean momentarily looked disheartened, but then defiantly claimed, "Ah, such trivial money." Once I marry into that company's granddaughter's family and land a job there, it'll all be manageable. Such was Sean's shallow thinking. He probably assumed that marrying into the family as planned and securing an executive position at his father-in-law's company would make the debt repayment seem trivial. However, when Ken reminded him of what he mentioned earlier about who had hired him to investigate, Sean's face turned completely pale. The truth is, Ken is Sally's twin brother. While I had little interaction with Ken when I tutored Sally, only exchanging greetings, Ken had developed an interest in me after hearing Sally sing my praises like a sister. Eventually, as I unexpectedly started working at the office, and Ken, having passed the bar exam during his university years, began working there too, he proposed to me. Considering my past and owing much to my grandfather-in-law and his family, I initially refused, feeling it was improper. Yet Ken revealed he had known about Sean all along and still wished to marry me with the full support of his parents, grandparents, and Sally. By then, my parents, fully aware of my circumstances, also blessed our union, leading to a happy marriage with Ken. Unlike me, who wanted to seal away the past, Ken had harbored a desire for revenge against Sean for years. The request from the chairman was initially thought to be a coincidence of names, but further investigation confirmed that the Sean Smith, who was the chairman's daughter's boyfriend, was indeed the same Sean Smith who had discarded me like trash. Based on that, Ken was about to submit the report first thing next week. You might have gotten away with it using a different spelling overseas, but in here, it doesn't work that way, Ken stated. I heard the young lady noticed the difference in spelling when she saw your driver's license. You claimed it was because a fortune teller told you this version brought better luck. But in reality, you've been dodging responsibilities left and right, haven't you? After all, Sean is a very common name in the US, so you were probably planning to claim identity confusion if anything went wrong, Ken said, admonishing Sean for thinking such shallow tricks would work on a lawyer. He revealed that he had already sent an email report to the chairman and his granddaughter. Adding to that, Ken said, since then, we've occasionally received inquiries from that financial institution checking if they had located you. I've also informed them about your situation. Sean, suddenly dropping to his knees, begged, please, somehow convince the chairman and the others that it was all a mistake. But Ken, with a sarcastic tone, questioned, why should I, a lawyer, tell such blatant lies to a client, especially when you've insulted my young daughter, who is in a wheelchair because of an injury, calling her ugly and defective? The truth is, Natalie's injury happened while she was on her way to violin practice. I took my eyes off her for just a moment, and she was knocked over by a high school student distracted by their phone. Since then, Natalie has been somewhat withdrawn, worrying Sally and her kids, who, upon learning that Natalie won a prize in an art competition, suggested, let's celebrate her achievement. Today was supposed to be for that celebration, but Sean's unexpected appearance turned it into a complete disaster. Ken, utterly doting on his daughter, was undoubtedly furious, not just because of Sean's past actions, but also because of the vile words directed at Natalie. Even as Ken coldly dismissed him, Sean, without any shame, continued to cry out loudly, pleading, please. The future of a man's life is at stake here. Are you going to ruin it? But Ken responded, ruin someone's life? Which right do you have to say such a thing? What he tried to do to Ra and the chairman's granddaughter was exactly the act of ruining someone's life. It's like the saying, curse others, and you dig two graves. A boomerang that came right back at you. You should accept it gracefully. When Sean still tried to cling to him, Ken brushed off his arm and said, the exit is that way, calling the building's security to escort Sean out. With a flick of his hand, as Sean's cries and resentments faded away, Ken and I exchanged smiles. Later on, Sean rushed to his girlfriend, the chairman's granddaughter, and made excuses. But she, already harboring suspicions, was outraged by the revelation of the truth and refused to see him again, effectively giving him the boot. However, the chairman and the executive director, upset over their beloved daughter and granddaughter being hurt, took further action. Sean, attempting to reconcile and bombarding her with messages and emails, was reported to the police for suspicion of being a fraudster trying to marry and infiltrate the company with a fake resume. While it didn't escalate to a criminal case, a warning was issued for the stalking. Sean, persistent in continuing his harassment, was eventually arrested and prosecuted. Though he received a suspended sentence with probation instead of jail time, the conviction meant he could find employment nowhere, not just outside of Tokyo, but across the entire country, despite superficially returning to his normal life. Finding himself in a desperate situation, Sean once again tried to go to America, hoping to find employment there. But with a criminal record, he struggled to obtain a visa and had to give up on that plan. Moreover, after learning everything from the chairman and the police, his parents disowned him, leaving Sean truly alone. Facing unavoidable debt repayment, he tried to find odd jobs, but without a smartphone due to being blacklisted, an expired driver's license, and no fixed address, decent work was impossible to come by. I heard through the grapevine that he ended up working for a shady handyman service introduced by the debt collectors, living in a dormitory with no privacy and working from dawn till dusk. But I decided to forget about it as soon as I heard, as it had nothing to do with me. On the other hand, Ken and I moved from our suburban house to a condo near the private elementary school Natalie plans to attend once her injury had healed. Natalie, who has been averse to taking the train since the accident, liked the bus accessibility and the view from our high-rise apartment, seeming happier every day. The previous house was a remodeled version of Ken's parents' home. So when Ken suggested selling it to move, I worried about what his parents would think. However, they, enjoying their second life in a warm sea town, told us the happiness of our son, his wife, and our granddaughter is what matters most. Don't worry about us. They actually encouraged us to go ahead with the move. Being closer to my workplace means more time spent with the family than before. It was a good decision. Ken, enjoying the new life as much as Natalie, said, watching them, I've been thinking about trying something new myself.